You're watching Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world to hear their views on issues making headlines. I'm Arirang. Now, millions of people in South Korea found themselves digitally stranded earlier in October when the nation's IT giant Kakao Corporation's apps for messaging, banking, transport and other essential services froze. Now, the cause was a fire at the platform company's data center, and it took more than 30 hours to restore its services again. The digital blackout has prompted not only concern over the management of the company's data facility, but also more fundamental questions about the ever-expanding dominance of IT giants in our day-to-day digital services. Well, we delve into the issue today with Marshall VAN ALSTYNE, Questrom Professor of Management at Boston University, and Jun-sok, Professor of Economics at the Catholic University of Korea, who joins us in studio. Welcome to you both. Thank you for joining us. And my first question goes to you, Professor VAN ALSTYNE. Now, we've had quite a ruckus here in South Korea after this whole issue, a lot of debate here, but I want to hear your views on this. The fire at the major data center south of Seoul causing a digital blackout of our country's most heavily used messaging, banking and transport services, of course. That's caused quite an impact on both individuals and businesses. And well, I wonder what your personal observations or takeaways were from the recent incident that we had.
Well, two quick thoughts are one is to simply hope there's no problem with any families or other from the fire, and hope there's no danger of that. But the second one is, of course, how could something like this happen? You would automatically think that services of this importance would have had backup systems or fault-tolerant systems. So to have these systems fail for such a lengthy period of time is quite remarkable and quite unexpected. Indeed, you would have expected the folks in charge of this to have thought this through more thoroughly, anticipating these kinds of problems and having other backup systems in place.
And well, Professor VAN ALSTYNE, then how should the data have been protected and safeguarded really in order to prevent this kind of digital blackout like the one we saw 2 weeks ago?
Well, things of that sort generally follow a couple of standard practices for fault-tolerant systems. For one, you don't have single points of failure. So if something fails, then you automatically have backup systems. Other is decentralized storage and backup, so that you have other ways to bring systems in place. Another is concurrent maintenance, so that if one system fails, then you can bring another system up automatically. I mean, in many ways, these are fairly standard practices, so that they have gone out, again, is surprising and somewhat unexpected. There's been a little bit of irresponsibility here, so these are fairly standard practices that should have been in place.
Now, Professor Yang, there's been a lot of criticism directed at Kakao and also Portal Engine Naver as well. And those two companies, they basically, they're present in every aspect of our digital lives these days, you know, from messaging to shopping to transport, online banking. And, well, they're so widely used these days that some people see them as public goods. I mean, what's your opinion on this?
Okay, well, it's a gray area. And if we do classify the network of Kakao and Naver as public good and should be regulated as a public good, then I think we're heading toward a slippery slope. And that's because, well, these networks started out to be a private network, and a lot of the services are offered for free, and people have come in and started using this network, and now they become very dependent on it. If you say there's a private playground, and a lot of people start playing on it, should that be just automatically considered a public playground? I think that's a bit of a question there. Now, for Kakao Talk services like Kakao Bank, Kakao T, where they're actually getting paid for services, I think you have a better justification there for trying to maintain at least some quality of data security, data redundancy, and so network redundancy, and so on. But for free services, I think there's a big question on whether you should automatically say because enough people use it, it turns out to be a utility. It also depends, I think, on whether there's an alternative means of doing the same thing. There's other messenger apps. So just by the fact that you use more people use it, it should be regulated as a utility. That creates a lot of legal questions and government taking, compensation, and so on. But what I think should be emphasized is that Korean businesses, not just IT businesses, but business overall, I think they do not take enough account of possibility of risk. They're not pricing risk correctly, and that's causing a lot of problems, not only in IT, but in other business areas as well.
And Professor Van Alstyn, not just in Korea, but in other parts of the world too, many people are taking all these platform services for granted, really, in daily life. Large IT giants and the services they provide, such as maps, messaging, and news services, we use them without a second thought in our daily lives. And some people are saying that they are becoming something akin to public goods. So how do you think we should understand such services?
I think it's a fairly good question. I think it would be interesting discussion with the professor, because I actually believe that a lot of this should be viewed partly as public infrastructure. If you consider how roads, railroads, bridges, telecommunication systems, the industrial era were used, in some sense, social networks, chat systems, e-commerce, search, social networks, these are becoming the infrastructure of the digital era. And when they're denied, folks are then without services, or they're unable to communicate, or they're unable to go shopping, or perhaps communicate professionally. So these are becoming infrastructural services. And indeed, even though they're not necessarily paid, it is the case that we might be paying in time, or in user-generated content, or in data. So I do think we need to start considering the extent to which these are infrastructure, and how we would manage that infrastructure for the greatest good.
I see, and that's certainly generating a lot of debate here in South Korea as well. And Professor Yang, now with the digital blackout, South Korea's Fair Trade Commission, they've been also looking into this issue and really questioning how, well, the ever-expanding presence of IT giants in our daily lives, and wondering if they've been affecting fair competition. And well, how do you see this? They've been dominating quite a lot of services, different kind of markets here.
Okay, well, this is a new phenomenon with IT, but theoretically, this problem has been around for a long time. The IT problem is something like the Kakao, maybe a network industry. And what that means on the supply side is that it has very high investment costs, but once you put the network in place, adding more people is not that difficult. So these tend to become natural monopolies over time. Larger firms have a better advantage. IT also has an additional network industry on the demand side, because, well, if you want to belong to a network, you want to belong to a large network which has all your friends in it. So once you reach a sort of a critical level, then that network has very advantages on the demand and supply side, so that it will become a monopoly. And right now, I think that has two problems. One is traditional competition policy, where entity like Kakao or Amazon, which has a network monopoly in retail or network, they can use that advantage, monopoly, to try to get monopoly in other areas. We saw this with Microsoft using the OS monopoly, Windows monopoly, to try to get competitive advantage for their internet browser. So there has been some movement that perhaps people who are trying to use this network should be on an equal footing. So the U.S. Federal Trade Commission, Korean Fair Trade Commission, they've been trying to have things like model contracts or competition policy laws where the people who are trying to use the network can be on a same bargaining footing, fair playing ground as the single networks. Then there's a second side, which is, I think, more relevant here, which is on data security. I think one problem here is that, well, if you look at these type of natural monopolies in IT, they tend to be serial monopolies or temporary monopolies. Years ago, it was Yahoo which had the monopoly advantage. Now, portal site is being dominated by Google. For Korea, years ago, it was Naver, and now it is Kakao. So there does seem to be some elements of competition here, but it does not show show competition at a certain point in time, but it shows competition over a period of time. When people have better technologies, they tend to become winners, and when they become winners, they become at least temporary monopolies. What I'm afraid of with trying to enforce the infrastructure security is that once the government says that Kakao should be regulated, it should have government will back secure data redundancy for Kakao, then it may become a dominant permanent monopoly because government is guaranteeing security for this network, but not for other companies, not for other new companies which come arise. So we may be exchanging, if we regulate it in a wrong way, then we may be exchanging what may be a temporary monopoly for a permanent monopoly, which in the long run I think is worse off for innovation and consumer welfare.
Well, I'm sure people here certainly don't want more bureaucracy in their messaging. And well, Professor VAN ALSTYNE, now many are pointing out that here in South Korea we've been putting all our digital eggs into one or rather two baskets. Kakao and Naver, of course, and those two companies, they really dominate online searches, messaging, banking, taxi hailing, gaming, the list goes on, even to grocery shopping and food deliveries, and they're constantly expanding into different commercial sectors at lightning speed, it seems. Is this a phenomenon that's quite unique to South Korea? I mean, to what extent do you think this kind of expansion should be allowed?
It's an excellent question, and it's not at all unique to Korea. If you take a look at China, for example, the dominant platforms are Alibaba and Tencent. If you take a look at the United States, the dominant platforms are the GAFAM. It's Google, Apple, Facebook, Microsoft. So it's quite standard that these platforms, once they achieve dominance, they move into adjacent markets rather quickly. It raises very interesting questions about what to do about this. Because I think there are two balancing forces. As the professor noted, it's quite correct that there are network effects, and there are efficiency gains if one firm is really good at doing something and use the data to actually provide higher quality services in the adjacent industry, then that's a good thing. In almost any other context, we welcome the more efficient firm moving into an adjacent industry. The problem that we face is that after connecting the infrastructure, that they gain effectively monopoly power. They gain disproportionate ability to exclude others, to monopolize data, to appropriate a lot of the economic rents for themselves. So the choice we have before us is to how we connect the infrastructure so you get the benefits of the efficiency, but we also create competition on top. There are ways to do this, but we need different antitrust policies than we've had previously. Traditionally, the antitrust policies of the past are based on physical goods. So if you drive a car, I can't. If you burn a barrel of oil, then I can't. That's not true for data. So you can have the same ideas that I have. You can have the same data that I have. And so we need policies that allow for the connection of the infrastructure, but the sharing of the data, so that we get the benefits of the efficiencies of scale, but we also get the benefits of the innovation on top, which allows the data to be used by multiple parties. So there's some really interesting new techniques that need to be applied to solving these problems.
Now, Professor Yang, in South Korea, well, obviously there's been a lot of concern about how we're putting all our eggs into one basket or two baskets. But at the same time, though, we have been benefiting from the very interconnected services that the likes of Kakao or Naver might provide. So in that sense, would it be counterproductive at this point to break them up or restrain their business activities? I mean, how would that really impact their respective ecosystems?
Well, as Professor VAN ALSTYNE just mentioned, there's a plus aspect of it, beneficial aspect of it, and harmful monopolistic aspect of it. But for things that we do have competition, Kakao Pay has competitors, Samsung Pay, LG Pay, Apple Pay, and so on and so on. People drifted to Kakao Pay voluntarily. So I think in that sense, it does show that the people want to have things in just one basket. Now the problem is then how to secure that one basket and also to have competitive aspects come in so that if there's better technology, then the new firms can become perhaps a new monopoly, which is subject to that underlying competition as well. And I think one aspect is we really need to look at, from the point of view of consumers, this is typically done in a competition policy, rule of reason. Is there more benefits to customers than the problems coming up from anti-competitive aspect of it? I'm not sure if Korea is capable of doing such a thing, because I'm not sure if Korea has enough experience in dealing with competitive cases like that. There has been a lot of cases in the United States where you do use rule of reason to try to get at the best possible solution, but Korea, I'm not sure, has enough experience. The legal Fair Trade Commission as well as the judicial branch, I'm not sure if they have enough experience to deal with this.
Well, hopefully, as we move forward, they will consider consumers' preferences. Hopefully, they'll bear that in mind. And well, this is where we'll have to end the discussion today. That was Marshall VAN ALSTYNE, Questrom Professor of Management at Boston University, and Jun-sok, Professor of Economics at the Catholic University of Korea. Thank you both so much for your insights.
Thank you.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Thank you to our global viewers for watching Global Insight. We'll be back tomorrow at the same time here in South Korea. Have a great day or evening wherever you are. Goodbye.